Do you know what it feels like to be betrayed by the person who promised to love you until the end? Not the kind of betrayal you can shake off after a night of crying. The kind that hollows you out, takes everything you built, and leaves you staring at a blank wall wondering how you didn't see it coming. My name is Maya Evans, and this is how my husband, the man I thought was my home, my safety, my future, stole everything I had, and how I made sure he lost everything he thought he'd gained. We met at a friend's barbecue. He spilled soda on my shoes and spent the rest of the evening trying to make me laugh. He did. He always could. He had that easy charm that made people feel seen. I thought I was lucky. Maybe I was at first. We built a life out of late nights and shared dreams. A modest house with blue shutters, a joint bank account we were so proud of, a small garden where we planted basil and tomatoes. Every Sunday, he'd make pancakes while I read the news aloud. We weren't rich, but we had enough, and we had each other. Or at least I thought so. Then came the small shifts. The kind you almost ignore. A new cologne. A different ringtone. Late-night business calls. He'd smile at his phone, and when I asked who it was, he'd say, "Work, babe, nothing exciting." But the laughter on the other end of the call? It didn't sound like work. I kept telling myself not to be paranoid. Until the morning that changed everything. It was a Thursday. I remember because I'd planned to pay the mortgage that day. The coffee machine was dripping, the dog was barking at the mailman, everything felt ordinary. Until I opened the banking app on my phone. $0. At first, I thought I misread it. I refreshed. Same result. Savings gone. Emergency fund gone. Every cent we'd worked for disappeared overnight. I called Daniel. Straight to voicemail. I texted him. "Hey, something's wrong with the account. Call me." No reply. That's when I noticed the small things, his closet half empty, the suitcase missing, the framed honeymoon photo gone from the hallway. The toothbrush. The watch I gave him on our anniversary. Gone. There's a kind of silence that only happens when your world collapses. I sat on the kitchen floor and listened to it. It was almost peaceful, like the calm right before a storm destroys everything in its path. I didn't even cry that day. The tears came later, after reality sank its claws in. But in that first moment, I just stared at my phone screen, scrolling through the empty balances. And then I remembered her. Sophia Lane. The consultant. The woman from work he said was just helping with a project. Every time I walked into his office, she'd lower her voice. He'd change the subject. And just like that, the puzzle pieces rearranged themselves into something ugly and clear. But anger is a slow fire. It doesn't explode, it smolders. And as I sat there on that kitchen floor watching my savings vanish, I made a quiet promise. You will regret this, Daniel. I don't know how yet, but you will. That night I barely slept. My mind kept replaying every detail of the last few months. Every lie, every smile, every "I'll be home late." I kept hearing him laugh. Not with me. With her. By morning, grief had hardened into focus. Daniel thought he was clever. He forgot who handled our accounts, who set up the autopays, who filed our taxes, who had access to everything. I spent the next week combing through digital trails. I checked our joint email, his old folders, cloud backups, every corner of our shared life. That's when I found it. An email he'd deleted but forgotten to empty from the trash. Flight confirmation, Buenos Aires. Departure. 2 days before he emptied the accounts. One-way ticket. He really thought I wouldn't notice. I almost laughed. I printed the confirmation and pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. Proof that the man I loved had traded me for a passport stamp and another woman. Still, I didn't confront him. I wanted to understand everything before I made my move. I started digging deeper, traced the transfers, followed the money. Some of it went to an offshore account in his name. Some went to a new business entity, DNS Consulting. D for Daniel. S for Sophia. How poetic. I could have gone to the police right then, but revenge is art, not impulse. I needed time. I needed precision. So I met with Nora Jacobs, an attorney who specialized in financial recovery. She was calm, sharp, the kind of woman who'd seen everything. After hearing my story, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Do you want him punished or ruined?" I said, "Both." Nora smiled just slightly. "Then you'll need patience." Over the next few months, patience became my closest friend. I pretended to crumble. I stopped posting pictures of my face, just vague quotes about heartbreak and betrayal. I made sure mutual friends saw how broken I was. Because people love carrying stories, and I wanted my story to reach him. Soon enough, a mutual acquaintance mentioned that Daniel had been checking my profile. Perfect. He thought I was suffering. Exactly what I wanted. Meanwhile, I gathered everything. Copies of wire transfers. Proof of his false business registration. Screenshots of flirtatious emails with Sophia sent during our marriage. Every piece was another thread in the web I was spinning. By the time I was ready, the trail led to an address in Buenos Aires, a fancy district called Palermo, Soho. Through a friend in travel security, I confirmed it. Daniel Evans and Sophia Lane, listed as tenants. I booked my ticket quietly. No social media updates, no traces. Just a simple suitcase, and the kind of calm that only comes when rage freezes into purpose. The flight was long. I stared out the window most of the way, wondering how a man could turn love into theft so easily. But by the time the plane touched down, I wasn't wondering anymore. I was planning. Argentina was warm that week, heavy with the scent of jacaranda trees. I found an apartment directly across the street from theirs, a perfect vantage point. From my balcony, I could see everything. The windows, the courtyard, the balcony where Daniel smoked at night. And there they were, laughing, drinking wine, dancing barefoot on their balcony. I should have cried. Instead, I smiled. I began documenting them. Photos, videos, timestamps. Every outing, every delivery, every late-night phone call. I even befriended the doorman, who loved to talk. From him, I learned Daniel had registered a new consulting business under a local alias, using money transferred from a U.S. account. The same money he stole from me. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was criminal. Still, I didn't act. I wanted him comfortable, relaxed enough to make mistakes. So I watched. For weeks. I watched their routines, their arguments, the way Sophia flinched when he raised his voice. He wasn't charming anymore. He was controlling. And that's when I realized Sophia wasn't my rival. She was my reflection, just a few steps behind me on the same road of deceit. He'd do to her exactly what he did to me, given enough time. That thought didn't comfort me. It disgusted me. But it also gave me an idea. If I could show her the truth before he did, she could become my weapon. I started small. A note slipped under their door. "He'll do to you what he did to me." No name, no explanation. The next night, I heard them arguing. Good. Seeds of doubt. Over the next few days, I built a dossier. Photos of Daniel's other online dating profiles, emails to women in other cities, everything I'd gathered over months. Then I waited for the perfect moment to deliver it. It came one bright morning at a cafe near the park. Sophia sat alone, scrolling through her phone. She looked happy, oblivious. I walked up, calm as glass. "Mind if I sit?" I asked. She frowned, confused. "Do I know you?" I smiled. "Not yet. But you know my husband. Daniel Evans." Her face drained of color. She whispered, "You're Maya." I nodded and set the folder on the table. "You might want to see this before you book your next vacation with him." She hesitated, then opened it. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the photos, the bank records, the screenshots of Daniel's messages to other women. Finally, she whispered, "He told me you were unstable." I almost laughed. Of course he did. It's easier to lie when you paint the truth as madness. I stood to leave. Do what you want with it. But if you're smart, you'll run before he steals from you too. And I walked away. I didn't look back, but I could feel her eyes following me. That night, the balcony across the street was quiet. No music. No laughter. No wine glasses clinking. Just silence. By morning, Sophia was gone. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched Daniel pace the balcony alone, phone pressed to his ear, panic etched across his face. And that, right there, was the first moment I felt peace in months. But it was only the beginning, because I hadn't come all the way to Argentina just to scare his mistress. I came to end him completely. The morning after Sophia disappeared, Buenos Aires felt quieter. The street below my balcony, usually buzzing with vendors and music, moved slower, heavier. Across the road, Daniel's apartment blinds stayed closed. He was coming apart. I could feel it. That week, I watched from my window as he made call after call, pacing the balcony with a cigarette in his hand, eyes dark, jaw tight. I imagined him on the phone with Sophia, with the bank, with whoever he thought could fix the mess I'd quietly started. But nothing could fix this. He'd built his new life on sand, and I'd just turned on the tide. Every evening, I'd write in my notebook. Not just plans, observations. How many drinks he had. What time he left. How long he stayed gone. Who came to visit. I learned everything. He was paranoid and restless. He kept his new business on a single laptop, the one Sophia had probably bought for him. He took it everywhere, guarded it like gold. That laptop would be the key. But I wasn't ready to move yet. Revenge without proof is just noise. I needed precision. I needed him trapped so completely that when the walls fell, they'd crush him from every side. And I knew just how to do it. Because Daniel didn't only steal my money, he used my identity. See, I handled our finances, our accounts, our digital footprint. When he created that fake consulting company, he used details pulled from my records, things only I would know. That meant he hadn't just betrayed me. He'd committed identity theft. That was my weapon. For the next 2 weeks, I built my case quietly. I created a timeline of every transaction, matched it to screenshots, and logged them in encrypted folders. Every night before bed, I'd whisper to myself, he'll never see it coming. But something unexpected happened. Somewhere between the planning and the watching, a strange calm settled in. The anger wasn't wild anymore. It was cold, steady, almost mathematical. One night, I stood on the balcony and looked at the city lights. Somewhere out there, millions of people were falling in love, making promises, trusting someone. And here I was, learning how to destroy the man I once believed in. It wasn't what I'd ever dreamed of doing, but it was what survival looked like. Then came the knock. 3 sharp taps on my apartment door. When I opened it, a man in his 30s stood there, holding a small brown envelope. "Delivery for Senora Evans?" he asked. I hadn't used that name since arriving in Argentina. I froze for half a second, then nodded. He handed me the envelope and walked away without another word. Inside was a single photograph, me, standing on the balcony, watching Daniel's apartment. No note. No signature. Just the photo. My pulse spiked. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He knew. Somehow he knew. I checked my windows, scanned the streets, looked for anyone watching. Nothing. Just vibrations of city life below. But the message was clear. Daniel suspected something. And that meant my clock had started ticking. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, reviewing everything. He must have noticed me somehow. Maybe from the reflection in his glass, maybe someone told him. Either way, it was time to move faster. I packed a small bag with essentials, passport, documents, cash, backup drives. Then I called Nora. She answered on the second ring. "You're early," she said. Her voice was calm, steady like always. "He knows," I whispered. "Or at least he's suspicious." There was a pause then. "Then it's time to push the button." She'd been waiting for this. We both had. We had already set things in motion. A series of reports filed through financial watchdogs in both the US and Argentina triggered by specific transfers from Daniel's new business. Once those accounts hit a certain activity threshold, the alerts would cascade into investigations. It wasn't enough to put him behind bars yet, but it would freeze him, lock his funds, corner him. The next morning, I watched from my balcony as he stormed out of his apartment, phone pressed to his ear, shouting into the street. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught fragments in English. "No, that's impossible. Check the other account." "What do you mean frozen?" I smiled. The machine had started. That afternoon, I walked through the park, thinking about what would come next. I didn't want to just take his money. I wanted him to understand, to look in the mirror and realize the woman he'd underestimated had undone his entire world. That meant one final step, one confrontation. But not yet. I needed him desperate first. So I started feeding him clues. I created a new email address and sent him anonymous messages. How does it feel when everything you stole starts slipping away? Maybe next time, don't underestimate the person who knew all your passwords. I timed them perfectly. Each time a new bank froze his accounts, a new message arrived. Within a week, he was coming apart. The doorman told me he'd been yelling on the phone, demanding to know who was hacking him. He'd stopped shaving, stopped going out. And late one night, I saw him standing on the balcony again, phone in hand, staring right toward my building. He couldn't see me, my lights were off, but I could feel his eyes searching. It almost felt poetic. The predator finally sensing the trap, but too late to escape it. One night, while I was going through the latest financial alerts, I heard a knock again. Softer this time. Hesitant. I froze. Another delivery? I looked through the peephole. Sophia. I hadn't seen her since that morning in the cafe. She looked thinner, her eyes hollow, shoulders tense. I opened the door a few inches. "What are you doing here?" I asked quietly. She took a shaky breath. "He's losing it," she said. "He thinks you're following him. He said he's being watched." I studied her face. There was fear there, but not for me. For herself. "He started yelling at me," she went on. "Said I ruined his life. I left because I thought he'd hit me. Then he called last night and said someone froze his money." I stayed silent. Finally she whispered, "Was it you?" I didn't answer. But I didn't need to. My silence said everything. She nodded slowly. "Good," she said. Her voice cracked, but her eyes hardened. "He deserves worse." She looked like she wanted to say more, then turned to leave. Before she did, she said over her shoulder, "He's keeping a hard drive. In the safe. All his transactions. Everything. If you want him to burn, that's where the fire starts." And then she was gone. The next day, I began the final phase. Daniel had hidden his crimes well, but he was careless with routine. Every Friday at 10 a.m., he left the apartment for a short jog, the only hour he didn't take his laptop or phone. At 9:45 that Friday, I crossed the street wearing sunglasses and a cap. I carried a maintenance clipboard I'd borrowed from the building staff. They were easily bribed with cash and a smile. When the doorman saw me, he nodded. He'd seen me visit Sophia before. "Senora Lane is back?" he asked. "Just helping with some things," I said. He waved me through. Daniel's apartment was like a museum of stolen peace. Expensive furniture, champagne bottles, travel photos of places I'd once dreamed of visiting with him. And on the desk, the black laptop. I opened it. Password protected, of course. But Daniel was predictable. His passwords always had patterns, initials, years, pet names. It took me 4 tries. Daisy 2016. The name of our dog. I almost laughed. Once inside, I found folders upon folders of financial documents, fake invoices, offshore transfers, spreadsheets connecting every fraudulent move he'd made. And tucked at the bottom, a video file labeled Final Escape Plan. My breath caught. I clicked play. Daniel appeared on the screen, speaking directly into the camera. His voice was calm, detached. "If you're watching this," he said, "then something's gone wrong. Sophia, don't panic. There's another account under the name J. Morrison. Use the contact I told you about. If it's Maya watching this. He paused, smiled, that same arrogant smirk I once found charming. Then congratulations. You found me. Again. Then he leaned closer to the camera. But just remember, you never really knew who I am. And by the time you think you've won, I'll already be gone. The screen went black. I stared at it for a long time. He thought he could still outrun me. He had no idea I was already in control of every account he just mentioned. I copied everything onto an external drive, wiped my traces, and left the apartment exactly as I found it. As I crossed the street back to my building, I saw him returning from his jog, earbuds in, oblivious. He smiled politely as he passed me, not recognizing the woman he'd once promised forever to. That was the moment I realized something powerful. He didn't just lose his money. He'd lost the ability to see me, the real me. Because when you underestimate someone for long enough, you stop noticing when they change. And I had changed completely. That night, I sent Nora a message with one sentence. Everything's ready. Her reply came quickly. Then let's finish this. When I sent that message to Nora, everything's ready. It felt like closing a heavy book I'd been holding open for months. Closing it didn't mean the story would end on my terms. It meant I was finally letting someone else turn the pages. Nora moved with a quiet urgency that felt almost ceremonial. She coordinated with authorities in both countries, not in the dramatic movie way, but through patient, meticulous paperwork, calls to contacts who owed her favors, and legal notices that had the slow, inevitable weight of machinery. We didn't yell into microphones or storm courts with torches. We used law. That alone made the coming collapse feel colder, more unavoidable. For a week, I kept my distance. I watched Daniel from the street sometimes, standing at a corner table in a cafe, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that barely touched his lips. He kept glancing at his phone, eyes hollow with worry. Once I thought I saw him look up at my building, and for a breath I wondered if he recognized me. If his chest tightened with the realization that the woman he'd discarded had been the architect of his ruin. But he didn't. Narcissists are rarely mindful enough to connect dots until the world is falling apart. Then early on a Tuesday, the first legal freeze hit. It started small. A message from Nora. Accounts flagged. Waiting for confirmation. My heart thudded. That afternoon, the doorman on the next block told me an armored van had arrived to collect registry documents from Daniel's office. The van left with boxes that once held the illusion of his new life. I watched the street swallow the sound of tires and felt a clarity within me I hadn't had in months. The things he'd built on lies were crumbling. He called Sophia that night. I could see him through the open window of his apartment pacing, phone red against his ear. His voice, usually smooth, was ragged with anger. "We'll figure this out," he kept saying, as if the universe was something you could reason with. He called his new partners, his obscure contacts. He pleaded with a bank manager. He begged. But banks don't beg in whispers. They respond to paperwork, to investigations, to the slow grind of evidence. Sophia did something that surprised me. She called me. Her voice over the phone was thin, as if she'd been bleeding from the inside. "He's freaking out," she said. "He's saying someone's out to get him. He thinks you're a ghost." "No," I said. "I'm real." There was a pause, and then she said something I didn't expect. "I don't want to be part of this anymore. I don't know him the way I thought I did." That admission changed something. She'd once been my rival, a clear line I'd wanted to erase. Now she was a person who had been used and discarded. And in a city where we were both alone, alliances shifted in tiny, pragmatic ways. Nora called me that night and walked me through what would happen next, step by step in legalese I almost understood. Freezing assets. Subpoenas for the consulting firm. Requests for transaction records. International letters rogatory. Nothing theatrical, just the work of law moving like a well-oiled machine. This is where he starts to feel trapped, she said. We don't have to break anything. We just need to keep the pressure. The days that followed felt like watching a slow avalanche. Details I'd collected, invoices, forged signatures, inconsistent vendor information, began aligning with independent audits Nora had triggered. Once, I sat in a cafe watching two stern-looking men walk into Daniel's office and felt a peculiar mix of triumph and emptiness. It wasn't satisfying in the way I thought revenge would be. It was procedural and antiseptic, the kind of justice that arrives with forms and stamps rather than fireworks. He tried to run on paper. He called lawyers. He transferred what he could into accounts that were dry wells. He set up shell companies in countries with friendly regulations. He made the moves men like him always make, quick, arrogant, certain that paperwork could plaster over guilt. But you can't hide a history of decisions. Each wire transfer left a breadcrumb. Each bogus invoice contained a trace of who had supplied it, who had signed it, which IP address had uploaded it. Nora and the investigators followed those breadcrumbs like hounds. I watched without revealing anything, because exposure too soon lets the fox slip away. Then came the day the police came. It was not cinematic. No red lights flashed in front of Daniel's building in a parade of justice. Two detectives, quiet and professional, arrived with papers and a warrant. He opened the door in pajamas, hair sticking up, eyes wild. He tried to charm them the way he used to charm me into forgiveness. It didn't work. There is no charm that works on the weight of evidence. They read him the charges: fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, the kind of words that strip the color from a person's life. Sophia was there, pale but firm, sitting in the living room with a reporter's file stuffed with the documents I'd given her. She had handed them over voluntarily. She told the detectives what she knew, how she'd seen transfers that didn't add up, the late-night calls, the look of panic when he thought he'd be recognized. Her testimony wasn't theatrical. It was detailed, banal, and therefore utterly convincing. He was led away with a rictus smile, the smile of someone who doesn't yet understand the depth of the fall. He promised to clear things up. He said he'd been set up. He said everything the guilty always say. I'll prove it, I'll explain, I'll be back. If you've never watched someone you loved go through a public dismantling, let me tell you, it's not pretty. In the first days, he called me from the holding cell or from the short line of contacts he was allowed. He left messages that were whip-fast apologies and excuses, sometimes a kind of pleading that felt obscene after what he'd done. He wanted me to visit. He wanted me to drop charges. He wanted me to fix it. I never answered. Instead, I watched him on the news. Journalists love a downfall, especially when it has sex and money and a foreign escape route. The story spread in the way these things do now, an edited clip here, an opinion piece there. An image of his face above the fold with accusations scrawled in leaded headlines. People called me, or texted, or posted about us in ways that felt like public dissection. The media made a theater of his humiliation, and the audience was merciless. That hurt in unexpected ways. For all his faults, he had been my husband. Human beings have a strange capacity to feel multiple emotions at once. Vindication did not cancel sorrow. The legal wheels turned slowly. Preliminary hearings, affidavits, depositions. Nora and the prosecutors painted a picture so consistent that even Daniel's own lawyers began to look like paper shields in a storm. At some point in the middle of the upheaval, his mother called. Her voice was a fissure of grief and anger, a woman who had loved a son and now watched him fold in on himself. She begged me privately to stop. Please, she said, forgive him. It was the oldest trick in the book. The pull of family, the emotional blackmail. I listened politely, and then I remembered the college fund that had been drained, the nights I'd worked overtime to balance budgets, the quiet compromises that made our life possible. I thought also of those who had been penalized by his schemes, contractors, assistants, people who trusted the veneer of his charm. Forgiveness would have been a bandage. Justice would be the remedy. When the prosecutors finally asked Sophia to testify in court, it was as if a final nail was driven into the case. She sat in the witness stand and recounted things I'd suppressed, the casual cruelty I'd seen in him, the way he minimized others to make room for his ego. Her voice was steady. She didn't glamorize herself. She told the truth of what she'd witnessed, the timeline of transfers, the phone calls she overheard. Her testimony was not spectacle. It was a beam of daylight. Daniel took the stand in a later hearing, and I watched him with an almost anthropological interest. He tried to maintain composure, but it leaked. The confident showman stuttered on direct questions. His explanations had the flimsy quality of someone improvising his way out of a trap he'd trapped himself into. He was not the man who could lie with charm anymore. He was a man confronted with his ledger. By the time the judge extended a restraining order, froze his remaining assets, and set a trial date, the scale had tipped decisively. The business, that had felt so invincible in the quiet of their apartment, was now a list of entries on forensic accountants' reports. The glitter of his new life dulled into paperwork and subpoenas. I want to say that the fall brought catharsis, but that would be a lie. It brought a hollowing and a reweaving. There was a clarity, a quiet space where I could finally plan what came next. But inside that clarity was the knowledge that lives had been damaged, some irreparably. Sophia had lost illusions, I had lost money and a marriage, and Daniel had lost the safety net of a life that seemed untouchable. After the arrest, there were fewer confrontations and more silence. The man who'd once been so brazenly present in my life became a cautionary headline. Friends who had been neutral reached out. Some offered sympathy, others curiosity. People who had been on the edges of our life took sides they'd never had to before. The world rearranged subtly in the space the scandal left behind. One night, Nora brought me a folder and sat down across from me without preface. "There's the matter of restitution," she said. "We can pursue everything, but we need to be realistic about cross-border collection. It's complicated, but you did everything right. We built an ironclad case." She opened the folder and slid a document across the table. The account freeze orders, the seizures, and an initial inventory of assets. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe. We talked about options, civil suits, partnerships with regulators, the possibility of sending funds to a secure account while the legal process continued. It was practical, clinical. The romance of revenge had been replaced by spreadsheets and legal briefs. The dull, honest work of trying to put fractures back together. Sitting there, I thought about what justice should look like. I thought about the little people, the contractors who'd invoiced Daniel and never got paid, the assistant whose paycheck had bounced when funds shifted, the family who'd trusted his advice. Justice, to me, had to go beyond a courtroom. It had to be reparative, not just punitive. So, quietly, I began to sketch ideas. A foundation that served women who had been financially abused by partners. A small fund to reconnect lost payments to families hit by the fraud. A scholarship for the children whose futures had been jeopardized by someone's greed. It felt right, not as a way to claim moral high ground, but as a practical response to the damage done. The news kept murmuring. Daniel's bail application was denied. Cameras would sometimes sweep the courthouse courtyard, but for the most part, the story was moving into the slow churn of legal calendars. In between hearings, he called occasionally. Those messages changed tone over time, first frantic, then pleading, then bitter. The arrogance drained out and something raw leaked in. I listened to none of them. The bitterness would have flamed something in me I didn't want resurrected. Instead, I wrote. I wrote drafts of the Foundation's mission, lists of names and possible donors, notes on whom to contact first. When I closed the notebook, the world felt marginally more ordered. The hunger for retribution, once ravenous, had been redirected into constructing something useful. Sophia reached out sporadically. Once she sent a simple message. "I'm sorry." The apology was sparse, not grand, not theatrical. But it was human. We both had been leveraged by a man's lies. We both had to reassemble our lives. One evening, as I walked past a small park where children kicked soccer balls into the dwindling daylight, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. The revenge I'd imagined, the dramatic retribution where a liar gets wrecked in front of a crowd, had been replaced by a truer, quieter currency. His assets were frozen, his reputation fracturing. The people he'd used were no longer under his thumb. And, if I did this right, what he had stolen might someday seed something tangible that helped others. If revenge had been my initial fuel, justice had become the path. And I would walk it until the end. The trial date loomed, but before that final act, there was time to plan the final weaving. To ensure that when the judge finally ruled, the remnants of Daniel's life would be rearranged into something that healed more than it hurt. I slept that night like someone who had finally completed a long, difficult crossword. Not triumphant, not at all, but steady. The trap had fallen closed. All that remained was to let time do the rest. The courtroom was silent. Daniel stood where the world could finally see him for what he was, a liar in a borrowed suit. Months of evidence unraveled his empire. Forged transfers, stolen identities, my signature on accounts I never touched. When the judge said guilty, Daniel blinked, as if the word itself couldn't touch him. 7 years. Not forever, just long enough for him to face himself. He looked at me once. I didn't flinch. The woman he betrayed no longer existed. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. But I said nothing. Revenge didn't need a headline. It already had results. I left Argentina that night. Back home, I used the restitution to start the Reclaim Project, a small foundation helping women rebuild after financial abuse. 5 clients became 50, then hundreds. Watching them rise was the sweetest justice of all. A year later, I got a letter in handwriting I knew too well. "You won. Prison is quiet. I dream of Daisy sometimes. Daniel." I folded it and smiled, not in triumph but in peace. Some lessons can't be taught, they have to break you first. Now, when women ask me how I did it, I tell them this. You don't destroy me by leaving. You free me by revealing who you are. And that's the truth about betrayal. It doesn't end you. It remakes you.